Hello and welcome to this rather unusual video. I just wanted to inform you that I have another channel where I talk about fantasy creatures and a bit of world building, so if you're interested in content like this right here, please head to my second channel and subscribe to it. You will find the link to the channel down in the video description. And with that said, let's start with the actual video. Hello and welcome to another wonderful world building exercise, and today I think it is time to take a look at how, at least in my opinion and imagination, realistic Sand Elves would actually work. Now before we start, let me quickly explain what I understand under the term Sand Elf. Sand Elves are a hypothetical race of humanoid creatures, adapted to live in the extreme environment of sandy and rocky deserts, alongside with anywhere else where the climate is hot, dry and arid. While sharing many physical traits with traditional elves, such as their pointy ears and slender builds, they would exhibit several adaptations unique to their environment. And in the first episode of my Sand Elf lore video, we will focus on these biological differences, before we move on to their society, how they survive in the desert, and build vast, sprawling cities right there, until we finally arrive at their warriors, their armies, and their preferred methods of warfare. Now firstly, the Sand Elf skin tone would be likely more darker than the average elven skin, thanks to the high levels of UVB radiation present in these scorched landscapes. This pigmentation helps to protect against burns caused by the extreme exposure to sunlight. Furthermore, their skin could likely contain extra layers of hardy or just fatty tissue underneath for added protection against the radiation or against extreme temperature differences, particularly at nighttime, when the air can cool rapidly. Alternatively, the elves would be not only hairy like a certain Potter, but have developed some sort of fur. Now, this isn't like the pelt of a penguin or a polar bear intended to keep them warm, but it would be more of a way to shield their soft skin from the heat rays the fusion reactor high up in the sky tends to send down every single day, and to also protect them from the cold at night, which could be achieved via goosebumps, and lessening the blood flow to their skin surface. And the fur would also have a protective feature against the sand. And speaking of sand, more so than radiation, these fine particles would essentially make a whole plethora of adaptations from the side of the Sand Elves necessary. The elven eyes, for example, would have likely larger irises compared to other species, in order to enhance the ability to detect and track movement amidst the shifting sand. Additionally, these creatures might have eyes designed to greatly change shape to reduce visual strain while navigating vast stretches of rolling dunes, and to protect them from the sun. Fun fact, there's also some spiders in Australia, of course it has to be Australia, that actually can see very great in the dark. But their eyes are not protected from the sun, so their eyes get burnt out by the sun every single day and then have to regenerate, which is less than suboptimal, and therefore the elven eyes are highly adaptable and can be regulated to a far greater degree than human eyes or even the eyes of other elf species. And this last adaptation would be particularly useful in areas with a very high albedo, and I'm not talking about the Floor Guardian Overseer here, but rather about wide plains or salt flats, where a great degree of sun rays are reflected, and therefore particular protections are necessary. However, if not enough time has passed for evolution to facilitate these changes, then Sand Elves would only come out at night, or at least at dusk and dawn, while spending the entire day away from the sun, most likely in their homes underground, which would allow Sand Elves to essentially avoid most of the problems caused by the sun. However, becoming nightwalkers is almost always the option a species is forced to take because the day is bright and filled with larger predators, and they can't simply compete with them. Also, I want to make a separate video about night elves, so our Sand Elves will be active during the day, and therefore have all these adaptations. Oh, and just like camels, the Sand Elves would also have fabulous eyelashes, simply to further protect their eyes from sand particles, especially during sandstorms. But since the particles are so light, round, coarse, rough and get everywhere, like for example the Sahara sand is blown over the Atlantic Ocean all the way to South America, even just mild winds might make such protection necessary. Now, another way to shield oneself against solar radiation would be light and mostly widely colored robes and cloaks, as to reflect as much sunshine as possible away from the body, while also protecting oneself from the incoming radiation. While the Sand Elves' nostrils would not necessarily be that much different from normal elves, they also would have quite the impressive amount of nose hair to block out and filter dust particles in the air, though a good piece of cloth could also again prevent the worst of the dust intake, and enable one to breathe just fine even through sandstorms. Now, the nostrils themselves would likely not have sinuses in the traditional sense, as simple dead ends, but rather have them all connect into each other into one very long breathing tube, designed to filter out as much water from the exhaled air as elvishly possible, in order to prevent the loss of this precious resource. Furthermore, we have to consider how elven ears would look like. While normal elven ears are pointy and skinny, the Sand Elf ears would be more akin to a desert fox, a fennec, than a normal elf ear, simply because they need protection against the desert sand that just gets everywhere, and therefore they would be very hairy and quite furry, in order to prevent sand from entering into the ear canal. And just like normal elves, Sand Elves would typically possess lean muscles, coupled with agile movement and a slender body. Perhaps they would be like kangaroos, and would jump rather than sprint. And their feet would likely be goat-like, in order to aid them with traversing the mostly rocky terrain. For while we associate deserts with dunes and perhaps the film and the story Dune, 90% of the deserts on Earth aren't sandy deserts at all, and they look a lot more like Badlands and the Rocky Mountains. However, unlike humans who struggle with stamina and just staying alive in hot climates, these creatures could retain their energy levels more efficiently due to special adaptations. For example, just like humans, they might utilize evaporating sweat systems, which releases water molecules into the air via tiny pores scattered over their entire skin surface when they need to cool down badly. However, they, in contrast to humans, could regulate this process, and they would also likely rush blood to their ears to let more and more heat escape. These processes keep them relatively fresh, even after hours of spending under direct sunlight exposure while being physically active. And last but not least, let us examine their appendages. The Sand Elven fingers would be elongated, and the same goes for their arms and legs, and especially their toes. And these modifications would allow them to avoid the worst of the heat directly over the sand, so Sand Elves would be a good chunk taller than their elven brethren. And Sand Elves altogether would look more like a Viera from Final Fantasy XII than just the regular elves. But they would be still very much elvish in nature, albeit a bit closer to a fennec girl than to a traditional elf. And next in line, let's take a look at how they would actually live, but only in the next episode. For today, this is it, and I hope you liked my little proposed elven species. If you do, please leave a comment and a like on the video, and as usual, I say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.